Hello and welcome to another episode of Invalid Entry. My name is James Taylor and we are going to be talking about importlib today. Importlib is the sort of internals of how Python imports functions, and we're going to be using it to dynamically import functions. And I'll talk about the pros and cons of why you might want to do this and when you probably don't want to do it and why we don't do it a lot. I think some developers aren't aware you can do this. I think it's a bit of a niche thing. Most languages have a feature which lets you do something like this. It's tied into reflection as well, so we'll be looking at a little bit of that as we go through. As a setup, I've got two Python files, one called sumstatic and one called test1.py. Test1's in a folder called mods, and we'll be adding some more files to that later. I'm doing something naughty. I'm printing off in the module itself on both of these, so we can look at when that actually gets run. Because that's relevant. They shouldn't be in there, and you shouldn't really print in a module, or you should do if name equals main and then work that out something. So I have just restarted my kernel. I will just restart my kernel again. So what I can do here is I can do import some static, and everyone knows that imports. Okay, so when you import it, it's run through this, and now have access to the JT what's here via that namespace. So I can do some static dot JT was here like that, and it's a function, so I should put functions on the end, and it runs that function. What's interesting, if I run this one again, it doesn't do the print because it's already got that module loaded, which means if you have lots of different modules and they're all importing like requests, or they're all importing a library, the library only actually gets loaded into memory once. It doesn't re-import it every single time you do the import feature. Back in old PHP days, you actually would at the top of your function have to do, it's not like include, which actually just literally copy and paste it in, where you have to, if this module is already included, don't include it a second time. So import and include in some languages are different. And it's important to know that difference here is this is an import, not an include statement, which allows better memory management overall. It allows you to build more complicated applications without worrying about loading things in too badly. Okay, so I want to import importlib. So there's an inbuilt thing in Python called importlib. Now I'm going to just import that. I'm not going to import the individual functions that I'm interested in, and the reason for that is I'm going to use a few of them, sort of thing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do m for module equals importlib dot import underscore module, and we're going to do mods dot test1. Now notice I don't do mods slash test1.py. I'm importing it as if I'd done import there, as if I would do mods.test1 there. So when I run that, it executes that test1 folder. It's run test1 as loaded, like it's been imported. Basically, it is the functional implementation of that statement, of the statement here. Not very dynamic, but there we go. So now we've imported that module, I can now look at the module and see that it is a module. It's come from this folder, which is very nice, and I can do m dot drm on that as well, and it shows it actually have a foo attribute to that. So I can do m dot foo, and it actually executes that function there. What's interesting, if I run this function again, it the same as doing the import again. It doesn't actually use that a second time. It only uses it on once. It's cached those elements. So one of the questions you might ask is, how do I do it? And you might notice that importlib has an invalid cache function. So you could go in here, and the line before this, oh no, press the wrong button. Line before that, you could do importlib dot invalidate caches like this, and it has no effect whatsoever. Now, invalidate caches is a very particular function which actually does discuss what it does, but I don't think it's necessarily clear here. So invalidate caches, invalidate internal caches are finders, and finders is basically saying if you've already scanned a module, like a folder module, but you've added a file to it, it will then be able to locate that file. So it's more for finding new files than it is looking for changes to files. And the other thing to watch out for here is that if I do invalidate caches, if I change this function here to bar at this point, and then say, or does invalidate caches work, run it, I've still got foo. Bar hasn't come into play yet, so it hasn't actually change that. So I can't reload this module, apart from I can, because there is actually a reload. Now, to reload a module, I actually need to access. Also, it's worth saying invalidate caches doesn't affect here. So if I run this again, import the top, it hasn't re-imported that module. That module's already imported. If I have access to the module, so actually m is my module object, I can do importlib.reload m. That m is a module, and I can create a module object. I can just, some static is a module, so I could. A second, before I run that, some static is a module. I can reference that without having to declare it as a variable. So I've now got a module called m. Importlib reload m actually reloads it again. Now it's actually returned a module object, so I should have done n equals importlib.reload like that, and see it's actually printed that off because it's got print7 in, which it shouldn't have, but it's printed off. I now have an n. Now n is actually the same module I passed in, but it's been changed. So if I do dir n m now it's got both bar and foo. It used to only have foo, but now it's got the bar function as well. It has effectively remapped those functions. And when you look at the reload, it is important to realize that it will map new namespaces, but things in the namespace are not rebound. So there is a code block in memory of the old foo. Just to prove that again, if I now make this foo bar and print in foo bar, save that file, reload the file, I now have a bar foo and a foo bar. So if I do n.foo, it'll print hi, n.foo bar will print in foo bar. So it does actually bring in the separate things. So that is the basic principles of what we're going to use. We've got an import, we're able to reload files on the fly, we're able to import them like this. So you're able to dynamically import, and those are the raw Python functions that we're going to be using in the next part. Okay, so the next thing actually I'm going to demonstrate is a decorator, a different use of decorators. So people who do decorators, very simple, are functions which are called before your function runs is the easy way to think about them. So they've got a bit of a weird syntax. So I'm going to have register me as a decorator. It takes a function as there, and then you usually do def inner, and then you do print hello in decorator, and then you do func. You actually call the function, and then you return the inner. Like that is the general way of doing decorators. I had to just check this a second ago, so you do something like this, blah blah blah, that's what it does. And I always think it looks weird because you've called function in this scope but don't actually have access to it, and it's more to do with when the code is actually parsed. So with that, you would then do register me def foo bar print hello, right? And that's generally how you do a decorator. I'm not going to use that feature actually. What we're going to use is we're going to cheat, and we're actually going to get rid of the inner function and just return the function, which means this decorator does absolutely nothing whatsoever. And what we're actually going to do is go here is master list is an array. So we're going to do master list append func. Okay, just for the moment. Okay, over here what we're going to do is we're going to do from my dex import master list comma register me. Okay, so we can just do print master check I'm still on the screen. I am, and you see it's an empty array, so I can now do register me def foo bar, and it doesn't matter what arguments I take in foo bar now, but that will become relevant in a moment. We'll put a message in there, print I. That's run, and if I now print the master list again, it now has a function in there, and I can now register another one, wibble, and that's also in that array. So what I can now do is I can do master list square bracket naught as a function. Run that, it actually prints it. I can then access the first element and run that as a function. Because these are function pointers. What we're doing is as the function gets registered, it's adding that function pointer to the actual array list, which basically means I have a registry of these dynamically loaded modules. This is again a useful feature. What you can also do is you could take a name there. Let's put this as a dictionary, and then here it'll become name equals the function pointer. So if I just reset this at this point this will be register me brackets foobar or f1 just for that function. This is going to be f2. So when I import that function, master list is empty. When f1, oh, back in a second. Ha! I totally had to look that one up. What you have to do is you have to put an inner function here. This inner function actually is not the same as doing the def. If you actually had a function inside that one before, inner 2 would take nothing, and that would do print before, and then you would do func like that, and then you would do return inner 2 like that, and then that returns it. So you don't want any of that. What we're going to do is return the inner, and the func gets called as per the previous one. So if I actually reset again, because we're doing data importing, import the register me, list is empty, register 1, register 2, go back to my list, so I have that, and I can now do master list square bracket f1. It's a function, so I call it, and it'll execute that function. If I want to do the other function, f2 will do it. So now what we have is the ability to load and register these things. The reason this is useful is I can now go to my test function. I can now do def, or rather from my dex import register me. Absolutely nothing registered at all because I haven't imported that. Nothing in there. Go back to this one. Register me foobar has a nice function name. What we can now do here is just go back into the master list, or back to the reload. So reload m, have a look at the master list, and now have a function pointer pointing at that. What it means is basically when I do the dynamic loading is I'll be able to have all my functions in a nice consolable array. So these may have other functions in here, some function which has some purpose, and that this may be calling like that, and it doesn't matter. So I'm only interested in on the register, and this is how things like Flask, you add your roots. You say root this particular URL there. So we're using this feature here to actually start building out some triggers, which will then match to the various functions. The mission again, I say, is some kind of Discord bot or Telegram bot, where you actually want to have some form here says if that matches some rule, call this function. So I'm going to set up a simulation right now of a bot and see how we can then use this to dynamically load modules at the start of the bot. Okay, so I've got two files here, fake bot and bot framework, and what we're going to do is start writing in the fake bot to begin with. As I say, this would really be your discord.py or your Telegram server. We're going to do it, I've got a file here of messages, so basically I'm going to just run through this file and read them in. So from bot framework import init and process. I'll follow those out in a second. I'm going to call it init first, just nice as that, and then with open my messages.txt as file pointer, for line in file pointer, because it's Python we can do that. Line equals line.strip, just because I know if I read each line I have the new line characters on there. Process line, and then I'm also going to do sleep of 0.1 seconds there as well. Save that. Use my mouse on this one. I'm just going to do def init in here, and then just print initializing. Did I pass process? Yeah, process there. So I'm going to do def process. This is good process message like that. I'm going to do print the message. I like percentage methods like that. And we're just going to make sure both files are saved. And over here, is that above the line that you guys can see? I'm pretty sure it is. It is. Python fake bot.py. And I didn't import time. Did I not import time? Fake bot. Nope. From time import sleep. There we go. And let's just go run those functions and call that process on every single time through. Okay, so that's going pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my mod here and just change my mod. So this is a command. I'm going to take a message in there, and that's all going to be good. I'm going to give it that print statement for the moment. I'm going to leave foobar in there for the moment and come back to that. In fact, I'm going to change this to hello world because that's one of my messages, hello world. Okay. Going back to FakeBot framework, what we're going to do now is we're going to initialize that. So from my dex import, in my decorator, I've got this master list. Import the master list, which is really cool. So I've now got the master list in scope. What we're going to do here is look at my Python code, which I had a second ago right in front of my face, but I've just lost because I've got too many tabs open. We're going to do the import lib, so we're going to do that import lib project again. We're going to just use m equals import lib dot import module, and it's going to be mods dot test1. The eagle-eyed amongst you might notice that a few seconds have passed and I'm now in a virtual env because this is an older Mac, it's using Python 2 in the framework, don't ask, and that's why it now didn't work, but now it does work, so I'm just doing mods test, and that should be fine. I don't know if I need that there. Let's just give it a quick go without. Yeah, so you don't need it there. Now what's actually happening is I take my print, still got the register hello me there, but what I'm able to do now is if in bot framework I can now say print master list, just to see what's been initialized. You see, yep, it has initialized this hello world. What I'm going to do in here now is I'm going to do for item in or key value in master list. What we're going to do now is we're going to say key. Have a quick drink. If message that starts with key, print matched. That lots of arrows matched, and we're going to give that a go. Okay, so what we're now going to do, key value in message list dot items. Get along. And there you see we now match on the one which is hello world. But we don't want to actually print a match. Okay, so I'm just going to suppress this warning for a moment, this print here for a moment. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to run the function. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do value, which is a function pointer, which is going to run the function, but we're going to pass the message in there. And here we're going to go in foobar, message was percentage s, percentage message. Okay, so you see it's suppressed the ones, it's actually run it in foobar, it's passed that message, the hello world message. Wasn't very convincing because that was the only thing on the line. We can now say hello world, this is the message. Add that message in as well. I've added some blank lines in as well just to make sure my file was working. And you see it actually called it twice because it matched on two of those lines. Pretty neat, pretty nifty. We've now got a framework where depending what's in here, the problem is I still hard coded this. There was no benefit of using import lib here. I could just at the top have said from words that don't make sense. from my test one, from mods import test one, right? There was no benefit really of using import module. The trick of registering here doesn't really do anything for me. I could just have imported it and not registered it, and not done anything else with that import. It would have shown up as an invalid import or unused import, but the import would have worked. What we're actually going to do is we're now going to use a bit of a trick to actually now search the system, and we're going to use OS path, and we're going to use another thing, which I'm just loading up on my screen, another thing to actually then dynamically look at what files are in there, so I never have to actually reference them ever. So the first thing we're going to want is we're going to want from os .path import dir name, base name, is file, and join. Okay, now you don't necessarily need all those functions. You do if you want to do it correctly and make it work on Windows as well as Linux at the same time, because Windows and Linux have different file separators, so join and is file. Join is the right way of doing it. You could also say, well, there's no folders in my directory, so therefore I don't need is file. But we're going to use those things. And the other thing you're going to want is glob, which you're going to want glob. You'll see why. So we're going to get rid of this static import here, where do modules equals glob.glob join dir name of the file, the mods folder, and asterisk.py. So we're going to look for all the Python files in this mod folder, and there may be other files. There may be PYC files depending on how your caching is set up. There may be other files in there as well, so we're only going to want to find the files, and the glob is going to match asterisk.py. Otherwise you're going to have to do you could use other OS functions like walk directory and things like that. Not quite enough close brackets there, which looks better. That's one too many, but yeah, that's right. And then for m in modules, well, actually it's really a file name in modules. We're going to if is file name, just in case anyone puts a folder in there called something.py. It ain't my first rodeo. I've been here before. And not f.ends with. I don't want to include init.py. Okay, for reasons that I went. Now I put extra brackets in there because default. I've got to stop doing that. This is just my style. I always put extra brackets when I instance. I just do. So what we're going to do at this point, we've got a module, so print attempting to load %s, and that is going to be base name f colon 3, just to get the last part of it. Sorry, -3. And also I don't want to print the new line character. Print also print as the new line. So I'm going to do module equals importlib dot import module. At this point I'm going to do mods dot, I'm going to add on the end here base name f colon -3. That will import the module, and that will cause, and then I will print OK. Now if that errors, what will happen is I'll see which one it's printing on before the error, so I know which file is causing me errors, especially if I have a Python error in my code. So if I run that now, f isn't done because I could change its name to file name. I've got another f somewhere here. File name. Okay, so at this point it's trying to load test 1, loaded it, matched, everything works. So I've now got rid of that dynamic module. So get rid of that completely. What I should be able to do now is copy and paste test 1, rename this to being wibble.py. I'm going to match something else in this test for my messages. I'm going to match ask a much trigger. Okay, so I'm now going to put ask a much trigger because there's a space in that. This function is going to be called wibble. It could be called foobar. It's not going to break anything. This is going to be in trigger module, and I'm going to run that and then see where we're at going. So at this point, what you should see is that to load 2 test modules without having done anything, just by dropping that file in the folder without having to register it or include it anywhere else, it's been included. And now I've actually been running, so it's actually now running these things really nicely. Just for a bit of clearness, I'm also going to, in my close some of these windows down bot framework, I'm going to do print like that. Okay, so you can see that there's some light lines there. So that's now working. We've now got the ability to dynamically import files, and this is the basis of my JMon module. My JMon module works a little bit differently. I don't use the definitive function. I actually have initialize. My modules meet an interface so that I can then call initialize on. This is my JMon spot, so I can basically drop files in, and it will automatically on the next start. That's very important to realize. Just find those modules and load them. Pretty good, pretty powerful. Means that your bot framework actually becomes really, really simple. Now I will say you can go one step further, and I will show that very clearly here. Instead of having these functions here as plain matches, you could potentially write them as regexes, something like this. Okay. What you'd have to do then is in your decorator, you'd have to recompile them, and in your loop, instead of doing dot starts with, because especially Discord messages, you may have like a sentence, then the command on the line its own, so you could break that down. What I can basically do on the message here is on message, I basically got find command. In my find command function, it basically does, for each one, it searches. It does a regex.search. You could do regex.match, but regex.search, it goes through and goes, yeah. If it finds an element in there, then it will then execute that function. So you could use regexes rather than starts with, just keeping it simple for this example. But that's dynamically loading modules in, and it means that you could actually commit this, write this program, run it as a command program, and then say, well, actually use this folder, take the folder as an argument, so this is my modules folder. These are where my instructions are. So you can then make a bot framework, which then imports things from, to actually make that bot have some different functionality. It's very simple to how things like, there's a couple of techniques in here. One is the registering in the decorator. So using decorators where's my here it goes. Using this sort of method to actually add a function to a list, saying I want this thing to run, then looping over that list. You can use it for testing. You can use that for all kinds of micro benchmarks tests, use that kind of trigger, rather than actually as a decorator which executes on every time through, because the actual decorators return the original function. So there's no operational cost of this decorator being in place because the actual function is still there. Decorators are really interesting when you get into the detail of how they actually work and what they actually do when they run. But yeah, there's some really cool little features there you've seen of importlib, and how you can use importlib to dynamically import from a folder. Now, the problem with this is, though, if someone has write access to this folder, then they can put files in here, and that will then execute. It will just import those codes and load them. That is both good and bad. I've used it here in a mod system, so people can mod it. They can take my bot and they can add their own little files in here. Without modifying any of the code, it will pick those files up and use them. The downside of it is the security implications of what that does. You're executing code. You could also do things where you download a file, save it, and then import it. Again, the security implications of that, if someone can hijack the remote server or potentially the DNS lookup, where that, so that you're not actually downloading your file, there's no signatures on the file, I think. But you could download a JSON packet containing data which is signed, check the signature, then execute it. In runtime without restarting the program, so it allows you to dynamically include code in your application. Certain applications do this. Things like Zapper or AWS Lambdas actually import code from S3. It grabs an S3 file, drags it into memory, and executes that to get around the initial Lambda file limit sizes. When you try and import some big libraries, you can what's called side loading those libraries. So there is a lot of power in this technique of being able to import code, especially code we don't know what the format is, we don't know what the module is. This registering technique, super powerful. just use it with the respect of what ifs. What if someone can, in this situation, someone can access this folder, well, they can access this folder and just run code anyway, so I'm not too worried. But it's how you combine these techniques with other techniques. That's where you need to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more aware of your surroundings. Anyway, I'm going to do another episode on actually dynamically reloading when someone drops a file in. So at this point, what you'll do is have the file already there, the program already running, and drop a file in, and then it will magically pick that up and execute it a second time. And we'll see that in the next episode. So if you're enjoying this, hit like, hit subscribe, and you'll get that episode when it comes out.